Good morning. Okay, so I have the great privilege and honor and pleasure to Be'ezrat Hashem be coming over the course of the next 4 weeks. So I was thinking of creating a bit of let's call a series, focusing on different aspects of authority in halacha, different areas of authority, which impact on the different Parshiot HaShavua. Try to keep it as close to the Parshiot HaShavua as possible. We'll see how it goes. So for today's shir, I'd like to talk a little bit about rabbinic authority. And specifically, how is there a pattern, is there halacha, how to deal with what I call lay laxity. You have a situation, people aren't necessarily keeping to the letter of the law or even the spirit of the law halachically, and how does the chachamim of any given door, how do they respond to that? Do you say, well, okay, we have a situation and we have to basically fight it tooth and nail and try to expect the community as a whole to be on the as high a spiritual level as halacha would demand, ideally, and we have certain tools at our disposal, including, call them disciplinary tools or punitive tools at our discretion, and we're going to use them to the full extent, if you will, of the law. Or do we say that we try to deal with, we look at the situation, we try to understand what people are going to be able to do or willing to do, and that perhaps if we push too hard, so then there will be a response which will be counterproductive to our basic goals, and it's better to be somewhat forgiving and bend as a result, and recognizing that we're compromising, recognizing that we're not demanding the highest standard, and perhaps even allowing for things which are halachically usher. But it's better to allow, it's a strategic retreat to allow for further growth down the road. And so what I'm going to try to do is try to look at different approaches. But first, starting from the Parsha. As I said, we deal with the Parsha. And so here you have the psukim at the middle of the Parsha. According to Chazal, there are actually, Sefer Bamidbar is split into 3 Sfarim. We call 3 Sfarim. As we talk about Chamisha Chumshei Torah, from a perspective of Chazal, it's really Shiva Chumshei Torah. Like Douglas Adams had his 5-part trilogy, so we have our 7-part Chumash. Right. So here you have this idea. Basically, we take Sefer Bamidbar and we split it into 3. What are the 3 parts? The 3 parts are the first 10 prakim up until the last 2 psukim of Perek Yud, which we can see here in number 1. Vayisu behar Hashem derech shlosh damim v'aron brit Hashem noseh lifnehem derech shlosh damim latur lehem menucha va'anan Hashem aleihem yomam b'nosam min hamachaneh. So you have the culmination of everything we've been reading up until those last 2 weeks, including what we'll be reading, the first few aliyot of Parshat Balotcha. You have the preparation for the entry into the land. You have the description of the camp, etc. And what does it do? Vayitzuv, they would travel when God, and they actually did travel 3 days with the Anan in front of them. Then the 2 psukim, Vayhi, which we're so familiar with because they're the psukim that we use when we take out the Sefer Torah. Vayhi ben Aaron vayomer Moshe kum Hashem v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. When the Aaron would go, so Moshe would say, "Oh, stand up, God, and scatter your enemies, and let all of those who hate you flee before you." Uvnucho yomar, and when the Aaron would come to a rest, Yomar Shuva Hashem Rivot Alfei Yisrael. Let, O Hashem, bring back the tens of thousands of Yisrael, and you have that the upside down nun. That's a shir in itself, by the way. Should those upside down nuns be in the Sefer Torah or not? It's not. We all think, of course, it should be, but it's not so clear. But that's perhaps for another time. And then you have the second. Well, so what was the second Sefer in Bamidbar? The first Sefer went until Pasuk Lamed Daled. The second Sefer is those two psukim, Lamed Hey and Lamed Vav, very short Sefer. And then the rest of the Sefer, from Perek Yud Aleph until the end, Perek Lamed Vav, that is the culmination of, that's the third Sefer, if you will, of Sefer Bamidbar. And what does that begin with? Vayhiya ka'am mitoninim. The people were complaining, or were people from within the community were complaining about Rabbi Eznei Hashem. Torah doesn't even tell us what their complaint was. Grumbling. Vayishma Hashem, God heard it. Vayichar apo, and he was angry. Vativar bam esh Hashem, and a fire went from God. V'tocha b'ktzei hamachaneh, at least in the edges of the camp, it impacted. And then we have two psukim later, ha'asafsuf asher bekirbo hitavu ta'ava, and we'll say the rabble in their midst had a great desire. Vayashuvu vayifku gam b'nei Yisrael, and also b'nei Yisrael. Again, no, I'm going to get into who are the asafsuf. How do you define b'nei Yisrael? But the people as a whole come and complain. Vayamru miyachilenu basar, and we want meat. And a few psukim later, I skipped 6 psukim here. Pasuk Yud Aleph. Vayomer Moshe Hashem, lama harayot la'avadecha, v'lama lo matzati chem be'enecha, v'asumit masa kol ha'am hazeh alai. Moshe turns to God and says, why are you giving me this? This is just too difficult for me. Ha'enochi hariti et kol ha'am hazeh. Did I conceive this people? Did I carry them, as it were, in pregnancy? Imanochi elatil, did I give birth to them? Ki tomar alai sa'eu b'chakecha kasher yisah ha'omenet hayonek. I have to schlep them around as though they're an infant, right? This is infantile. Ala damash nishbat lavotav. A couple of psukim later, lo uchal anochi levadi laset et kol ha'am hazeh ki chaved mimen. I just can't do it. It's too much. And then you have the continuation of the whole story with Eldad and Medad, and even Moshe, to the extent I can't do it, he says something which is incredible. In kacha atoseli, if this is what you're going to do to me, hargeni na harog, just kill me now. I'd rather be dead than have to deal with this. So what's going on here? So the Netziv in his commentary, the Hamek Davar in the Hakdama, so he points this out, and he says something important about Sefer Bamidbar as a whole that we should be aware of. Sefer Bamidbar, he wants to claim, is a Sefer which is the Sefer where, if you will, the rubber hits the road. This is the Sefer where everything that has happened until now is transitioning into a much more realistic and what we would call realistic and practical way of life that Am Yisrael is going to have to adopt in order to live in Eretz Yisrael. Because until this point, everything that has happened in Yetziat Mitzrayim and at Har Sinai has been miraculous. Now, in Sefer Bamidbar, we begin to hit the real world. And the real world, it in of itself, he claims, and it's a much longer discussion than what I'm going to give to it now, that is the purpose of Sefer Bamidbar. You now have the Machana, and he wants to claim that the split, I'm not going to read it inside right now, but the split between the beginning of the Sefer. And what we just said, Vayhi b'nso Aaron, and now afterwards, so that's the split. Until now, it's been, if you will, the world of the world of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of Har Sinai, of creating the Mishkan, of the Machaneh, etc. All of that is there. Vayhi agam mitoninim. They're still in that, if you will, that land of that expectation of being at that very high spiritual high, and that's why the moment that there's a drop, even mitoninim, so then there is the circumstances, and then the rest of the Sefer, the bulk of the Sefer, is the sorting things out. And of course, we're going to know next week's parsha. We have here the mitoninim. We have the ta'ava. We have next week. We'll have the miraglim. We'll have Korach. We'll have 38 years in the desert, and then we will finally be able to go in. So there's a long transition period, and that's what Sefer Bamidbar is all about. And if you take a look at Sefer Bamidbar, you see there's a lot of things starting in our parsha with the Pesach Sheni, where the Am is the catalyst for the change, and things are it's more bottom up rather than top down. Okay, Rav Soloveitchik, in a really wonderful drasha, I probably should have put a link to it here on the page for anyone who's interested, but you can Google it and you can find it very quickly. And it's a drasha from, I think, exactly 50 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, I think 1975, which he gave at the RCA convention in honor of Rabbi Klavin, Zichrono Livracha. So he has on our Parsha Balotcha, he sees the same type of break, but in a slightly and very important different way. And he says that basically, what was the problem? Why couldn't Moshe handle this? After all, he's able to stand up at the Egel. He's able to stand up at the Meraglin. Right? Here, suddenly he says, forget it, I just can't do it. Kill me. Right? It's just too much for me. But what was so terrible that I'm asking for meat that had them do that? And basically what Rav Soloveitchik wants to say, and this is why the Torah puts it, is that the mitoninim and the mitavim, they took the wind out of the sail. Whereas if you take a look at the first 10 prakim, you are in this, you're building up. Yitro, the last story is Moshe saying, come join us, we're on this journey, and we don't know whether Yitro does or not, but that's the apex. We're about to enter the land. We're days away from entering the land. And comes the mitoninim, and the Torah doesn't even have to tell us what they were complaining about, what they were grumbling about. Just the fact that there is this malcontent and this sense of things aren't right. Oh, we need, this is the next story, but we need some meat, right? And now we remember what was like in Egypt. It was Moshe just isn't able to handle that. He can handle people's failings. He can handle things that are going on, Aveirot that happened, the Egel. Okay, there's a crisis, I can deal with that. But a sense of just this, this underlying discontent, that is something that Moshe just isn't able to handle. And from that point on, as I said, it's really a really wonderful drasha. It's Kedarko B'Kodesh, it's not a short drasha either. And it's the Rav points out story after story in our parsha, going, leading up to leading down to the Meraglim. Every story is on is on that line of development. So here we have, to the theme, if you will, of the shir, is this is something which already goes back, to how do you deal with this? And what was Moshe's response? Moshe's response to his dealing with a community which isn't quite able to reach the heights that are expected of them, says throw up his hands. And when he throws up his hands, So God responds first with the Slav and also with creating a group, the Zkanim, the 70 Zkanim, who are going to support Moshe. And of course there is also the Eldad and Medad, who are going to be, if you will, independent leadership, whatever their nevuah was, that the independent leadership within the Machaneh. That's how we're going to deal with the problem. And of course, they'd have to take a look at the subsequent cases of the Meraglim and Korach. Things don't always work out so well. Right? So this is that is, if you will, the first instance where you're dealing with a problem of the community. How does the rabbinic leadership, and here Moshe Rabbeinu leadership, deal with it? So we see how he deals with it in the case of the Kirot HaTava. If we fast forward a little bit to halachic understanding, so we see different approaches. Here's the case number 4. Amar Rav Yosef. Zamre Gavre Va'ane Nashe. So if you have a situation where men are singing and women are responding, well, you have this chorus, and it's a problem. Pritzuta, right? So this is considered pritzut. After all, kol bi'isha erva, you have a problem of, we think that this is a major, or maybe major, minor, but this is an issue that needs to be dealt with. It's a lack of sexual morality in the community, so it's considered pritzut. But zamre nashe va'ane gavre. So if you have the reverse situation where women are singing, they're the lead singers, and men are responding in the chorus, ka'esh bin oret. So it's as though there's a fire in the flax. This is something which is going to spread very quickly in terms of, and lead to much more serious issues. Lemay nafkamina. So who cares? I mean, if pritzut isn't a good thing, and esh bin oret is a worse thing, so okay, so they're both bad things. We should be trying to get people to not to do either one of them. So what's the difference? Livituleha mekameha. We take, it's risk management. We understand which situation is worse. So the second situation is a more dire threat to the religious sensibilities, and so therefore we should be trying to deal with that first, and then deal with the first situation where Zamre Gabre Va'ane Nashe. Rashi, explaining this, says, first he explains that this is a problem of kol bi'isha erva, right, that the voice, women singing, is considered to be problematic. But about Rashi says, the last line in the bold in the second in the first paragraph there, aval eno mavir yitzro kol kach she'ena mizamrim matim oznam lekol ha'onim. So it's true that there is kol isha, but it's not, since the primary singers are the men. So they're the whenever I learned this Gemara, I'm going to refer to maybe a song I should have been listening to, but Lou Reed, right, and and the Color Girls sing, but you don't pay attention to that, right? You pay attention to the rest of the song. You hear the boom in the chorus, but that's the idea. They're the background singers, and okay. So but what do you do? The next line in the Rashi, Livituleha mekameha, right? So im ein shomid lanu levatel et shnehem. If you talk to the people, they say, listen, really shouldn't be doing either one of these things. They're both bad. Right? We shouldn't have women singing in front of men, but people won't listen to that. Nakdim levatel et zeh shehu ka'esh bin oret. So then, be willing to bend a little bit, take care of the more problematic type of singing, where women are the lead, and if there are women in the background singing, okay, that, you'll leave for the future, etc. In other words, you don't have to go and try to, if you feel that under these circumstances you're not going to win the war, pick your battles, figure out which ones you can win, and pick the battles which are more problematic. Yeah.
Miriam sang with the women at Yam Suf.
Okay, I don't want to get into the question of Kol Isha. This is not the issue. In other words, it could be, and we will see, it could be mixed dancing. I don't care, right? And it's not a problem, and it's like what the problem is, and whether it is a problem, and how to deal with the situation, etc. The issue here is that, okay, this is considered to be, one issue is considered to be bad, the other situation is considered to be worse. If you don't think that you can win both battles, fight the more problematic issue. Yeah.
When Moshe says, I can't take it anymore, kill me, 38 years later, when God says, okay, now I'm ready to take your life, Moshe prays, I want to live.
Okay. Or maybe he figures that he's done a good job the last 38 years. And he's able to go on. Okay, let's go back to the shir. Number 6, on the flip side. So another story. This is not a story. The first one wasn't a story. The first one was more of a case study. This is an actual story. When Rabbi Yehuda Nasi passed away. Amar. So these were amongst his last words. Homina ika bebavel. Right, there's the town called Homina in Bavel. Kule Amonai. All the Jews are descendants of Bnei Ammon. Maskira ika bebavel. Kula demamzerahi. There's a town called Maskira. In other words, he has this, I guess, almost nivuah, but this Ruach HaKodesh that goes through him, and he begins to tell us these things, that this town of Maskirai, that all of the people who live there, the Jewish community, are all halachically considered to be mamzerim. Birkaya ika bebavel. Everything, apparently he just wants to get rid of Bavel. Right? All the problems are in Bavel, and he's in Eretz Yisrael. Birkaya ika bebavel. Shnei achim sheyesh shemachlifim nishoteim zeh bazeh. You should know there are two brothers who practice wife swapping there. Okay. Birata desatya ika bebavel. Hayom saru me'acharei hamakom. So there's this place called Birata desatya in Bavel, and today they rebelled against God in this town. Da'akve peira bekavrei b'shabata, va'azil v'tzadu b'hu b'shabata. They gathered they ran the stream into some kind of pool and fished the fish on Shabbat. Vishamtidu Rav Achi b'Rav Yoshia v'ishtomad. And Rav Achi b'Rabi Yoshia, so he was the rabbinic authority in this place of Birata Desatya, and Ishtomad. And the people went and gave up their religion. They became, they decided, okay, Rabbi, you're telling us we can't do this on Shabbat, so we'll join the Zoroastrians. All right, that's it. Right? They gave up the religion. This is a strange story on many different levels. Like, of all the things for Rabbi Yehuda Nasi to be talking about on his deathbed, why these particular issues? Why only Bavel? Why is there any significance to these cases? So many years later, a person who had to deal with his own issues. Let's skip number 7 for a moment. We'll come back to it in a moment. In the end of the 14th century, beginning of the 15th century, the Trumat Hadeshen, the leading posek, one might say, of Germany in that period of time, and much of Ashkenazic practice to this day, because it influenced the Ramah very significantly. So much of Ashkenazic practice follows his psakim. So he said he had a case where he had to deal with a situation of putting someone into cherem, and he said the following: Shamar Rabbeinu HaKadosh be'et ptirato b'derech nevuah Rav Achia bar Oshia shamtinu lahanu da'akfu peru b'kavra v'chilul Shabbat. So he quotes the case Vikasha, right? What's underlined here? Vikasha, I have a problem. My ashmu'ina talmuda bahak milta. Why does the Gemara have to tell us the story? What significance does the story have? V'Rabbeinu HaKadosh Gufei l'may hilchata niva davarza. Right? If you were given the gift of nevuah, like, what would you want to be mitdaber? Would you really want to be mitdaber, about this community? And the community became what significance does it have for us? But what significance does it have for Rabbi Yehuda Nasi B'chla? What's going on here? So he says the following: Lashmu'unan da afilu im nireh l'chachamim shemipnei shehen minadin u'machrimin mandahu. Because even if Chachamim see and say, listen, we understand, we're going to put this person into cherem, we're going to excommunicate this person. And as a result, the person is going to, we'll say, go off the derech. But more than just going off the derech, they're going to leave the community, they're going to join forces. In the modern period, so we could talk about, but really modern started with Spinoza, not before. The idea that you could be if you will, not part of the religious community, the Orthodox community, but still remain affiliated with the Jewish community. And of course, in the period of the Haskalah, period of Reform and Haskalah, and amongst the Zionists, so this became a much stronger trend. But it becomes to the point that we take it for granted. But until that point in time, so you were in or out. If you turned your back on the Jewish community, that meant that you were joining the Christian community, the Islam, the Muslim community, the Zoroastrian community, if you're in Bavel at that period of time. In other words, wherever you are, you're going to be joining the other team. So now, by pushing a person too far, so it has dire consequences. It's not a question of, what's he going to do? He's not going to, we'll see some modern issues as well, but in the medieval period, this is the late medieval period, so he's saying, we recognize that he might become a Christian, and this is after all of the Crusades and all of that. That shouldn't sway you. You're the Rav of the community. You're seeing Chilul Shabbat. You put them into their place and you say this is unacceptable, and either you cease and desist or you're in Cherem. And if they're going to turn and say, okay, Rabbi, keep your Shabbos, we're going to the other side, okay. That's all you can do. You do what you have to do, and people will do what they want to do. Right? You have your responsibility. They will do whatever they do. You stand your ground. You do what needs to be done. A case beforehand, a little bit later, in Spain. So this is number 7, the Akedat Yitzchak. A very important perush to the Torah. Influenced the Abarbanel very strongly. The Akedat Yitzchak's son claimed that the Abarbanel plagiarized his father. It's a discussion in its own right, but he was of the last generation in Spain before the expulsion. He was in Aragon, in the area of Barcelona and the like. The Abarbanel was in Castile, near Toledo, what would become Madrid. Madrid is a city, only happened after the expulsion, but in that area of Spain. So he was one of the leading lights of Spain before the expulsion, and he died in Italy. And it's not totally clear, but it's quite possible that he died in a pogrom there in 1495. In any event, he tells the following story: Kama pa'amim. And you'll see why I said this is probably the most famous piece of the Akedat Yitzchak, but you'll understand why in a moment. Kama pa'amim, several times, nichbati al zeh, odot hanashim hakdeshot, shahaya isuran rofef biyad shoftei Yisrael asher b'dorena. And he says this happened several times, which means that it's a pretty pervasive problem. There are Jewish prostitutes in the communities, and the question is, how do the rabbinic authorities deal with open prostitution in their midst? ולא עוד, אלא שכבר יאותו בקצת הקהילות, ליתן להם חנינה ביניהם, גם יש שמספקים להם פרס מהקהל. Right? So there are those communities where they turn a blind eye to it, and there are other communities where it has effectively become legalized prostitution. They're even giving them support. Pras me'akahal. Why? Ki amru. כיוון שמצילות את הרווקים או השכלים מחטא איסור אשת איש החמור או מסכנת הגויות, מוטב שיעברו עליו זה משיבואו לידי או לא איסור סקילה או סכנת שריפה. Okay, now basically you have the following. You have Jewish prostitution. That's one possibility. You know that there is going to be a certain percentage of your male community that are going to go astray. And if you stamp out the prostitution, or you do your best, so then they're going to find their outlet either with married women in the community, or they're going to go to non-Jewish prostitutes. And non-Jewish prostitutes in pre-expulsion Spain, so from a Christian perspective, if a Jew was found to have had sexual relations with a Christian woman, that's a capital offense. So basically the communities said, well, what's going to happen? We're going to either have the much worse avera of adultery from a halachic perspective, or we're going to risk men's lives because they're going to take the risk and they're going to go to the Christian alternative, and that will lead perhaps to at least some of them could die at the stake. So it's better, obviously we're not saying it's a good thing, but it's better to have legalized prostitution in our own midst rather than to have those consequences. And this is in effect, I mean, obviously the discussion changed in terms of the parameters, but it's very similar to the legal discussion today, whether there should be legalized prostitution or not. And it was, again, depending on the question of this is harm reduction, in effect, to use the term that's used now. And then the question is, okay, how do we deal with, of course, the definition of what harm is changes from one society to the next. But this is, in effect, what those communities were saying. So, Ani danti al ze pa'amim rabot lifnehem. So he says, now in what's right after the highlighted text. Ani danti al ze pa'amim rabot lifnehem ulifnei gdoleihem v'isbarti lehem shachet hagadol asher yavor alav ish mibeit Yisrael beseter v'shalo ledat rabim u'v'shut beit din chatat yachidhu. So he says, he dealt with this many times, pa'amim rabot. So as you see how just invasive a problem it has become, pervasive a problem. So what is his argument? He says, listen, what people do, people will do. That's my educational problem, perhaps. But they are, if you will, big boys and girls. They're making their decisions, and we understand sometimes people make the wrong decisions. But right, so and when they do, that is their own personal chet. And they are taking their lives into their own hands, whether it be in the heavenly court or in the court in this world. But we are clean. כמו שהיה אדון פילגש בגבעה, הם היו בית דין שלהם מוסרין האנשים הרשעים ההם נבדים ביד ישראל. So he compares it to the case in Sefer Shoftim of the Pilegesh B'Giva, that there was a problem because the community didn't hand over those evildoers to the Sanhedrin. Omnam hachet katan kshiyaskimu alav dat harabim v'hadat nitne b'tei dinehem shelo limchot bo. However, a small aveira which is agreed upon or sanctioned, I should say, by the community, and it is receives the imprimatur of the courts. Shalolim chotbo, and the decision is made not to try to stop it. Henehu zima v'avon plili v'chatata kahal kulo. Lo nitan lemechila im lo b'purunat kahal kamo shaya b'dvei yamin, etc. So he says, but if the community gives its sanction, so then the entire community is responsible, and then it becomes a communal sin. So even though the aveira of the legalized prostitution is from the perspective of the, if you will, the people who are engaged in this activity, that aveira is relatively minor as compared to a case of adultery. But from the communal perspective, if you give sanction to something, so then the community is held responsible, and he brings the case of the Pilegesh B'Givah as his proof, which led, of course, to the almost entire annihilation of Shevet Binyamin, because not because the Avera happened in their midst, but because they defended the wrongdoers. So that was that's the approach of the Akedat Yitzchak. We have no idea, at least I have no idea, as to how much did people listen. How much did people not listen? Could he, looking back, at the time of the expulsion, try to perhaps connect the fate of Spanish Jewry to the decisions of those Batei Din? Perhaps the Akedat Yitzchak himself did so in his own mind. Now we don't know. He doesn't say so. But this is but this is his approach. You can't sanction something and allow for it without being culpable yourself. Right? So here we have two examples, if you will, of hardline resistance and taking the harder line to that idea. About the same time, a little bit later, you have the following tshuva of the Radvaz, number 9. Okay, so the Radvaz was born, as you can see, that's why generally I'll put the date so people know who we're talking about, but here it becomes also very important because you see their connection, if you will, to the other people. The Radvaz, so he certainly didn't know the Rav Yitzchak Armai. He came from a different area of Spain, but he himself was one of the Megurashim, and as a boy, he was 13 in 1492. And he made his way to Egypt. He died in Tzfat, one of the most important leaders of the community here in Eretz Yisrael and in Egypt, and he left thousands of tshuvot. So in one of these questions that he received, "Mimeni odiacha dati be'elu apritzim ha'ovrim averot biyad ramah u'vishat nefesh u'kshabaim liyaser otam omrim she'amiru." So you have this, it's not clear where this is taking place, right? But again, this is in the aftermath, in the decades after the of the expulsion, which arguably until the Shoah was the greatest seismic shock that Jewry had received in hundreds, or maybe even going back to Bar Kokhba, the greatest shock. And you have people who are not necessarily willing to be totally shomer Torah mitzvot to the fullest degree. So, and they say, if you push back against us, Rabbi, we're just going to turn to the other side. So, what should you do? So he says, I have been torn by this my entire life. Again, so it means that it's something which is not a rare occurrence, this kind of discussion. Ki al ken tafuk Torah ve'en koach lachofet risha'im ve'al ze ani mitpalel b'chol yom shelo tera takala al yadi aval mikol makom magid l'chadati b'zay. So, I look at this and this is just too difficult a decision. I mean, you see what the circumstances are, you see what the repercussions might be, and I'm going to give you my idea, and then he sort of gives the hardline approach. That's what I deleted. It's much longer tshuva than what's here. But then he says, "Va'af agav shekatafti kol zeh lahalacha." Even though this is what I've written, lahalacha, this is that we should take a very firm stance. Mikol makom, nevertheless, yesh lemanhig hador liyot matun b'dvarim ke'ela. So people who are the leaders of the generation need to be very careful, cautious, moderate. I don't know how to translate matun under these circumstances. V'fi she'en kol hanashim shavin v'lo kol averot shavot. Not people are different. The level of the infraction is different. Haketzad adam shu ragil ba'averot. So he gives an example. You have a person who is very clearly a rabble rouser. Uboteach ba'atzmo b'tanato. What sometimes I guess you could call the village apikoros. Okay, he knows what he wants. He's going out. He's telling everybody what he thinks. He's a dangerous influence on others. Ein choshishin lo v'yeh mashiach v'na'amid Torah. Right, so then we don't take him into account, and we tell him what we stick to the clear halachic line, and what will be will be. But we're going to stick to our guns. V'imeino ragil v'karov hadavar shishma mamshichin oto b'dvarim. But if you have another person who is wavering, and he's not hardcore apikoros, so now you have to judge whether a strong reaction or too strong a reaction will push him over in the other direction. Ein mamaharin, so you should talk to him. Perhaps he'll do tshuva. You shouldn't be too quick to punish him because of what it might lead to. Right, so he says, use your head. Right, try to figure out what is going to cause the less harm, and you have that kind of leeway to try to make that determination. In other words, it's not so simple simply to say, okay, this is the halacha, this is what you're going to do. Let the chips fly where they may. Right? We don't always say that. Sometimes we will say that, but not always. When it comes to the halacha, so you have a contemporary of him, and their paths crossed, and they did not always agree with one another, and that's the Shulchan Aruch, Rav Yosef Karo. Also born in Spain, he's about a decade or so younger than the Radvaz, but he was also one of the expellees. So so someone who is over the Aveira, so then you put him into Cherem immediately. And the Ramah, their contemporary now in Poland, says the following: So he doesn't bring any leeway whatsoever. This is the approach of the Truma Tedeshan, and we do what needs to be done, and we're not concerned that someone might, as a result, leave Judaism entirely. The Taz, a generation or so later, in his commentary to the Ramah, says, "Tmi ali hai milta tuva deha'ech nachush li'isur she'oseh zeh v'naviyu l'dei tarbut ra'ah chas v'shalom." So he doesn't quote the Rabbis, but he goes in that direction. He says, you have to be thinking. 1 second, what is worse? Kal v'chomer b'zeh she'adayin lo hitchil b'avodat kochavim klum pshita shetzrichim anu lahayot nizharim liot lefachot b'shei ba'al ta'aseh v'lo sat ma'aseh la'aviyam. In other words, think about it. In the case of the Trumat Adeshen, there was Chilul Shabbat. There were people who were going and doing something publicly, and this is what they were doing. They were, etc. So maybe here you have a situation where you say, okay, I'm going to take a very strict line. The person isn't there yet, right? That's the Rabbi's case, and maybe you don't have to do anything. You don't have to take any. Sometimes the decision not to take action is action itself. So you don't have to take any action. You can just turn a blind eye. You have to go running and put the person into cherem because of this? When you know that this could very well lead to him leaving the community entirely? Please, right? That's the way that the Taz deals with it. His younger contemporary, the Shach, so commenting on this directly, so he says the following, number 12, Taz, Hikshar Ramah, v'yesh l'tchot kol ra'yotav. Everything that the Taz said, you can disagree with and disprove. Dahacha, the kevan din beitinu sheminadinoto. Since the halacha is under these circumstances, again, there are halachot. When do you put a person into cherem? When don't you put a person into cherem? Today, we all know that cherem, starting really because of the Spinoza case, but that to put people into cherem, you put the cherem, my beit didn't put you into cherem, and then everybody, it doesn't have any teeth to it anymore. But generally speaking, but having said that, so he says, but if the halacha is that you are supposed to put someone into cherem, ein lachush din lo kein batla din Yisrael. In other words, you have the other situation. You have to look at the other question: is what extent is there going to be authority to the courts? What extent is there a rabbinic authority at all? And if you're willing to give up on your rabbinic authority, so then you're basically throwing out the baby with the bathwater because you want to try to protect this individual, but the entire system is being undermined. Right? So that's his argument. This comes to an incredible case. Basically, the Chassam Sofer here is this is now about 150 or so years later, and the Chassam Sofer has the following question, what should you do? And you can see, I don't know whether he was directly influenced, but he takes a very Kantian approach to law and order here. So this is his case. His question is, well, should you put someone to cherem, and then as a result, you're going to, I'm not going to read it inside because of the time, but as a result, you have to, his family is also going to be impacted. In other words, it's one thing if you say, I'm going to put him to cherem, okay, so you have that's the question that we've had until now. But now you're going to keep his wife from going to shul. That he says this explicitly. You're going to keep the kids out of the school system. And now because that's all part of cherem, you're putting the family into cherem. So now, if you're doing that, so you are impacting on, we'll say, the collateral damage of the family, and the entire family might go off into and join Christianity. Now, this is already the early modern period. So now we have a situation where people can relatively easily become Christians, get baptized, and people are. This is the same time dealing with Mendelssohn, who did not, but his family, etc., and subsequent generations, and with little, with not too much baggage within the Jewish community, because it's being viewed also as being something which is necessary to rejoining the larger European family. So if you have someone who's in the community, and now you're basically saying, we're not going to educate your children, right? So, and we're not going to let your family come to shul, so what do you expect is going to happen under these circumstances? So what does the Chassam Sofer say? So he says, and the person who's asking the question doesn't want to do it, and it's based on himself on the Marshal, and then say, Machloket Gaonim and the Marshal, who was earlier back in the time of the Ramah, says that you shouldn't punish the family. He says, Lefi ani adati, at the very bottom of page number 2, the last 2 lines. Lefi ani adati, yesh li liyashed divrei Gaon Rapalti, it goes to the original, the Gaon back in Babel, who said you should put people into Nidui. For this, you should put them into Cherem. Al kain aleinu levatla mi beit hasefer legaresh ishto mi beit hakneset kidei shelo yeh lo laharasha shum zchut hamisayo u'mikom makom ein beze shum hefsed lebanav u'liishto. What's going on? If I'm a Rasha, but my family are tzaddikim, so then I have had that influence on them, and therefore their zchuyot are going to go to my credit as well. And so why should we let this person who's a Rasha get any zchuyot? And you say, well, why should there be collateral damage to the family? They're not going to be punished. Why? וגם לקיום העולם העומד על הבל תינוקות של ברגן, לכל המחשב לעשות מצווה ונאנס ולא עשה, מעלה עליו הכתוב כאילו עשהו. They're going to get to Shemayim. They've become Christians. And now, are they going to be judged negatively for this? No, it wasn't in their control. We did it to them. It wasn't their control. In other words, so everything is basically very much, as I said, very Kantian. It's like there is a crime and a punishment, and you have to do exactly what is right. And then if there is and now you say, but these people aren't a part of the community, they're okay too, right? Because they didn't do an Aveira. They were forced into a situation, and since they were forced into a situation, they won't be judged negatively. And he says, the one thing that I'm not quite sure about is the children, right, is that it will be worse for them to be goyim than had they been Jews. So I don't know, right, whether, he's trying to work out the calculation. So but if you have older children who are going to make the decision, that's not your problem. If it's younger children, but you see, very, people who take a very strong line. I'm going to, the last 8 minutes or so, I'm going to just jump now to 3 tshuvot of the modern period of Rav Moshe Feinstein and of the Rav Vadia. Just different cases. Rav Moshe, dealing with this now in America of the starting in the 1950s. First tshuva is in 1954, in number 14. So here's the question. You have people who, which was not uncommon at all in the mid-20th century. You have a community which is ostensibly Orthodox. It might have been what in the Midwest was called traditional, but basically it's a community without a mechitza, shul without a mechitza. But the men and the women are daven on separate sides of the shul. Okay, and now there is someone who wants to, again, in the 50s, if you're talking about Orthodox, there were many shuls in the Orthodox Union that did not have mechitza. Okay, so throughout the country, and mechitzas are obviously not my discussion right now. But this is so there are people who say, well, once we don't have a mechitza, so we might as well just have mixed pews. That's the shalah. So the question is, should the rabbi try to stop this, or does he say, okay, it doesn't make a difference anymore? Right? So his answer is the straight out of it. He quotes the Gemara, that's the first Gemara that we talked about in terms of the women singing. So he says, it is no question, it is, while of course, the shul should have mechitza, and Rav Moshe even goes so far as to say that mechitza is doraita elsewhere, which is a very radical approach. But he says that there's obviously no comparison between having separate pews and mixed pews. So if you have separate pews, that's better, and then mixed pews. So if you're going to fight a battle, fight the battle. You can't get a mechitza into the shul. Okay, but make sure that the pews stay separate. That's case number 1. Okay, case number 2, number 15. So this is I think this is within to the Young Israel movement. I'm not 100% sure. This is 1963, and he's asked with regard to social dancing in shul. Well, you have a community fair, and you have the social dancing, a mixer, and the mixers are for the youth of the shul. And the argument is, compare communities, right? Similar but on very different level of intensity of what the Akedat Yitzchak dealt with as well. Because the argument is that if you allow for mixed dancing in the shul, so then the Jewish boys and girls are going to socialize one with another. And if you don't allow it, they're going to go to mixed dancing venues in the big city. And who knows what's going to happen and who they're going to meet and where they're going, and it'll lead to intermarriage, chas v'shalom, etc. Right? Not that it'll lead to the mixed dancing. Right? The mixed dancing here will lead to something else. So should you do it or not? Right? He also talks about bingo here. It's a very interesting thing. Anyway, so how far should you go? So he says that under no circumstances should you allow for mixed dancing in the shul. Now, this is the time period, or in the early 60s, where many Orthodox shuls had social dancing and had mixers for them. What? Okay, it was throughout. But Rav Moshe comes out strongly against it. Correct. And that's the argument amongst those who are Mekel. Many shidduchim will come from it. Right? And we're not saying, we understand that there's a problem with mixed dancing, but the alternative is worse, and there are good things that are going to come of it. As we all know, right? We're dealing with 60 years later, right? Can you think of a single Orthodox shul where they would allow for a mixed dance at this point? Right? No. Right? So things have changed, and during the 1960s, I don't know if it's 60s, 50s, that certainly in the mid-20th century, the majority, if not all of the younger Israels had this. This wasn't something which was unique. Right? The mores have changed. But when Moshe comes out against it, and he doesn't quote the Akedat Yitzchak, I don't know if he ever saw the Akedat Yitzchak, but he basically says the same kind of argument, that he says that there's a difference between turning a blind eye, trying to minimize damage, as harm reduction is what we said before, and sanctioning activity which is asur halachically. And since mixed dancing is something which is asur halachically, you can't sanction it. I can tell you again that this is now going back about 35 years ago or so, 40 years ago. When I was teaching in a high school in New Jersey, and it wasn't an Orthodox school. It was a community school, but it was run under Orthodox auspices. And the question was whether they should allow for the students to have a mixed dance in the because these kids weren't Orthodox, and in order to encourage inter-Jewish socialization. And under these circumstances, one of the Talmidim of Rav Moshe, Rav Shechter, so he was Mekel. He said that you could allow for the mixed dance under those circumstances. And it was because of the understanding of what the alternatives are. All right, so there is, even here, but again, it's a different kind of case. It's not an Orthodox shul, it's not an Orthodox school. Right, so under these circumstances, Rav Shechter, at least, again, very much along the lines of what the Rabbi said, right? That not every Aveira is the same, and not every community is the same, and you have to understand what the circumstances are, and based on that, to move forward. The last case here. Hold on. So is we won't get to Ravadia. We'll stick with Rav Moshe. The third case of Rav Moshe is the case in 1957, and this is 1957. Or 56. So this is a case in Mexico City. Gets a question from Mexico City. They have a Jewish community center there, which is glattreif. Right? They serve, you name it. The question is whether they separate the shrimp from the pork. And okay, that's the question. Everything's there, and they're willing to go kosher. Willing to go kosher on under the following condition, right? That if a guest at the JCC, after having his fully kosher fleishik meal, wants to have ice cream for dessert, and it'll be served on the milchik dishes, but it'll be served at the table right afterwards, that it will be allowed. In other words, you have the menu, and the menu is open to everything. They're going to make sure the kitchens stay kosher, and you'll have rabbinic hashgacha for all of it, right? What? No. It's very clear. Very milchik ice cream, right? That's it. It was the people. It was basically say the institution's going to remain kosher, but we're not going to police our customers. And if they want to have something which is dairy after they've had meat, that's their business. Right? I don't know whether it would be served together. That they don't say. It sounds as though that to that extent they would say no. That would cause things not to be kosher. But you just had a fleishik meal, and now we'll bring you out at the same table. We'll bring you out on the dairy dishes. We'll bring you out your ice cream. Right? That's okay. That's the condition. And otherwise, no hashgacha.
Or you could have a couple where one person has dairy, the other person has meat, and they're saying
right, but that wasn't even the question. That wasn't the question. Right? I'm reading it on. So can you do this, right? Right? This is very similar to the debates that were going on here in Israel. Can you give hashgacha in the 1980s? Can you give hashgacha to institutions which are b'chalal Shabbat? The food is kosher, right? But we're not going to, if it's b'chalal Shabbat, we're not going to, so if somebody wants to go there on a Tuesday, so fine, but, it's a chilul Shabbat. So, that in itself, that's the tshuva of Rav Vadia, which I'm not getting to. But it's very similar. So Moshe takes the stand that under these circumstances, right, you should give them the hashgacha. And he says, whatever people will do it, as long as it's very clearly marked. What is going on, and then you can do that. Today, by the way, we understand why Rav Moshe did this. Today, I would not know of any institution that would get a hashgacha under those circumstances.
There are aromas here that serve milk completion.
I'm sorry?
There are aromas here that have hashgacha that serve milk completion.
That have hashgacha?
That have hashgacha.
What about a hotel?
They just have it on different plates and everything.
No, but
one's disposable, one's not. They do.
Okay, so then I take it back. But to the best of my knowledge.
And hello.
Okay, so then I retract the last statement. But it's the hotel question is a major question. To this day, but it's different. It was within the same dining room at the same time. That's what I'm trying to say. Is that on one table is eating fleishik. Remember, they're having their fleishik meal, and the other table is having the milchiks, and the same table you remove the fleishik dishes. I don't know whether you get it. I don't know about the aroma. I have to look into that. So, but again, the circumstance. So you see, just to sum up, because I've already over time, that at least Rav Moshe's approach was to take both of these lines together. In other words, to say, what's my line that I can't cross? I can't sanction an avera. I can't sanction an avera. I can't give it, I can't say it was done under rabbinic supervision. No, if it's an avera, it's usher, and I can't do that. But if it's a question of stopping people from doing averot, as long as it's clear that it's not sanctioned by the community, not sanctioned by the rabbi, and I think that it's going to allow for the greater good, if you will, so then I'm willing to do it. So you would say, well, if I were to ask most people here and say, I'm going to have the dining room, which has mixed milchiks and fleishiks, or the mixed dancing, right? Which one are you going to be more makil with? right? I think many of us would have been more makil with the dancing than they would have been with the dining room. But Moshe is saying no, because here's the principle. The principle is very clear. The moment that I say at an Orthodox shul that there's a community-sponsored mixed dance, so then I've sanctioned the Avera. And that I can't do. But if, on the other hand, you have a dining room which is kosher, and there are people there who are not keeping milchiks and fleishiks properly, that's their problem. Okay, so you see the line, at least that he drew. There's a lot more to be said about this, but I don't know what the community would allow for me to do if I went further over time. Okay.
Yeah.